Welcome to Meadowlarkers. I'm Tom Haberstroh. I am taking the point guard duties today, and I understand that we have 53 is the number of the week. This episode is represented by, who is it? Dawkins, Don Drysdale, Amin. Help me out. 53. What is that?
Yeah, shout out to Don Drysdale, the late husband of my good friend Ann Myers Drysdale.
Yes, we should leave it there. I mean,
Yeah,
we're covering all the ground, the women's basketball ground.
Yep.
Amin's personal relationships.
That's my dad's favorite baseball player of all time. So let's
really?
Go. Yeah.
Loves Don Drysdale episode. There we go.
So that's Kate Fagan, as always, Amin Elhassan, and we're going to talk NBA today, and mostly about James Harden being out a month with a foot injury, right?
Yes. A full hour.
Yeah. I texted with Jeff Stotts in street clothes. He let me know that only 3 instances of guys missing more than 4 weeks due to a foot strain.
And there's the show. All right, We're done. We have a lot to talk about here. We'll start with Joshua Primo, who is someone that the audience might not know. He's a lottery pick from the San Antonio Spurs from 2021. And he was waived by the San Antonio Spurs. That shocked the NBA that they would waive someone just after they had signed an option or picked up the option on his third year. And as we covered on Basketball Illuminati this past week, Kate, it was a stunner. Why would they do that? And the news started trickling out that there was an accusation being made of indecent exposure, that he had exposed this 19-year-old had exposed himself to multiple women. And we didn't get many details. ESPN wasn't really covering this quite to the extent that the local paper, San Antonio Express News, was. And they had gotten the details that this woman was not just a woman, it was someone who is a staffer, a psychologist, the team psychologist, a former Spurs psychologist, alleges that Joshua Primo had exposed himself to her in one of her sessions with Joshua. Then on Thursday morning, Tony Busby, the law firm, which also represents several of the Deshaun Watson accusers, Dr. Hillary Cawthon is her name, and he's representing her, and he held a press conference. ESPN was not there. Mainstream media was not there. And we have a situation where not many people are talking about this story at a national level. And Amin and I hit on it a little bit. But the most interesting thing to me in this story is that this happened, according to Hillary, this happened in 2021, Kate. The first initial exposure where in a meeting with this psychologist, he had exposed himself back in December of 2021. And she has filed a lawsuit, not just against Joshua Primo, but the San Antonio Spurs. And so we had learned in this press conference and in the lawsuit that she was alleging 9 different occasions that he exposed himself to her. I mean, this is not a story to me about Joshua Primo and Dr. Hillary Cawthon, as much as it is a story about a cover-up, or how do institutions keep this buried, because she alleges that this happened in 2021, and she reported it to the GM of the San Antonio Spurs, and basically they didn't do anything about it, nothing of substance. And so, Amin, do you agree with me that yes, this is a really reprehensible thing that he is being accused of, but this also speaks to the institutions involved that did not protect her. They protected him, it seemed.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things here that really hurts the San Antonio Spurs rebuttal, by the way, they put out a statement saying that they disagree with the accuracy of facts, details, and timeline presented today. While we'd like to share more information, we will allow the legal process to play out. The kind of gut punch to their defense is that Josh Primo essentially admitted to doing what he did. I don't know if he admitted to the frequency or the nature of it, but clearly in his statement, he is accepting responsibility for what he did and kind of blaming it on mental health, vaguely kind of insinuating that there's some past trauma, right? So no one, I think, is denying that he did this to this woman. If that's the case, then I don't know how much you can argue that the Spurs did not know that this was happening. And that's the crux of it. The crux of it is she's saying this happened, it was reported, no steps were taken. And so, Tom, I think that leads us exactly where you talk about the idea that wrongdoers do wrong, but oftentimes the wrongdoing is afforded a nice and hefty screen by the institutions.
Yeah, and I think one thing that distinguishes this story from other recent sports stories like Deshaun Watson is that you're talking about a mental health professional who's on staff within the franchise, as opposed to someone who an athlete is seeing outside of those walls who is not also on the pay staff. And clearly Josh Primo saying, some of this is past, he has been the victim of past trauma. I mean, it maps very well onto the fact that, yes, so he probably was seeing Dr. Coffin, if we are acknowledging that, that's probably somebody he would have been seeking out within the Spurs organization. But it's to me, what the crux of it, Tom, as you teed up, it is one of several stories that is happening right now, including the NWSL coaches being fired and examining what's going on with the NWSL, along with what is happening in Boston. It is one of numerous stories where we almost have like an onslaught where it's like, what is the experience of being a woman in professional sports? And one thing I keep thinking about is there tend to be this belief from sports fans that there's like a seeking out of the spotlight or of revenge when something like this when someone is alleged of something like this, whoever is making that accusation is like actively seeking to make this public, as some sort of revenge. And you can see as you unravel this story, like, this is not a woman who wants to be put in this position, because if that was the case, then she would have made it public in one form or another a year ago. And so it's just like, we talk a lot about culture on this podcast, but often we give the NBA a pass because we're like, well, look at
they're
all
the good guys.
They're the good guys, right? They're so progressive and they're doing all of these social outreach programs, but damn if they don't have a lot of issues right now. And maybe it's because they were the most forward thinking in bringing women into positions, and yet they did not have the infrastructure to respond to this type of behavior, whatever you will call it, like the NWSL is like the handbook, the guideline of how we are going to handle these things. Maybe the NBA opened up their doors and they actually weren't capable of taking care of the women who would be walking through those doors. That seems to be where we are in a small way right now.
Hey, let me ask you a question. How surprised were you that Dr. Coffin put her name on it, so to speak, and as Tom said, stood up in the press conference and spoke for herself, when typically when you have cases like these, anonymity is typically the route that people choose?
I was surprised because when I was looking up this story and then I saw that there were, obviously you can find pictures of an NBA team's, one of their mental health professionals, but then there were some that looked like, oh, wait, this is from a recent public appearance. Oh, this is from a recent press conference. Oh, she is actually speaking about this right now and stamping herself on this story as in like, I'm not going to let that I'm not going to hide in the shadows. And that is not something that we frequently see. And if you go and you like, I happened to listen to her TED Talk from a few years ago before recording Meadowlarkers about the culture within sports. I mean, this is not a woman who needs to seek out the spotlight, by vaguely making accusations. And this is also someone who has her own very public-facing career as a mental health professional in both basketball and other sports. So I was really surprised by it, because as we can see, it may not be Joshua Primo himself saying, oh, she's lying, but certainly his representation is suggesting that.
Yeah, not only Kate is the representation suggesting that this is all fabrications, but they specifically said she's a gold digger here, that she's seeking financial benefit, when in fact, I believe the lawyer made it clear she is not seeking financial damages in this lawsuit. She wants to just make it right. And the fact that it's very aligned with the fact that she's willing to speak out, that this doesn't appear to be one of those stereotypical money grabs that people always, jump into your mentions to say, oh, she's just looking for money here. Like she and the lawyer were both pretty clear that this is not a case where she's seeking monetary damage. She really wants to set this right and expose how this went down. And the other interesting thing is that the lawyer for Joshua Primo, Kate, is saying that Joshua Primo has suffered from trauma as a child as a way to explain his behavior, but also says that this was an accident, that he was lying on the couch and that somehow his genitals were exposed and she never mentioned it at all. And so actually, isn't she the problem? And I'm sitting here like, which one is it, man? Is it that he suffered childhood trauma and explains how he would expose himself intentionally, but also you're saying it was an accident? To me, it can't be both.
Yeah. I mean, that part to me within the lawyer's statement was just, the biggest deep sigh you can let out when he's like, well, maybe it was his shorts. They were too tight. And like, come on. I mean, we're all alive right now. That's not how this is working. That's not what's happening. Come on. Like, and it's suggesting a level of naivete from her too, that like, as if she would be so offended if he was lying in his basketball shorts. I mean, it's the thinnest veil of an excuse that allows, that to me is like this wedge you put in, that like 2 weeks from now you can say, well, yeah, okay, well, maybe his shorts were too low. Well, maybe it would, and you can just keep making that wedge bigger and bigger to make the lie and the truth somehow meet in 2022.
Well, and then the other part of it is 9 times his shorts were too short.
Yeah.
And as she, I'm sure, has brought it to someone's attention. Yo, by the way, his short shorts keep exposing his private parts. Like at some point, once, maybe 9 times, that kind of flies out the window.
Yeah. And just to use my own experience, nothing like what Dr. Hillary Coffin is suggesting, but when I was covering the Sixers, like, this thing would always happen where whatever rookies were coming on board or young guys who were signed, right? They're trying to understand the NBA lifestyle. And like, as a reporter, you're going in, I mean, no, I'm not telling this to you guys, right after the game. And it was always the rookies who would spend the first quarter of the season with their penises out as frequently as they could have them. It was like they were just walking to the shower without a towel around them to just sort of test boundaries. And at about the quarter season mark, some veteran would just be like, fucking stop. and then it would stop. And so it's like, I'm not equating these two as like one-to-ones, but
yeah,
right.
And there's also a huge learning. Like, I don't think this for Joshua Primo, like, I don't know the full story and his behavior patterns in all ways, but like, it's not like I think, oh, this should be the end of the road for his NBA career. If anything, I'm thinking, in some ways, thank God for him, this happened right now at 19. You know, it's like when you're a little kid and you get caught shoplifting when you're 11, and it's like, well, actually, that probably saved me from trying to like upgrade to in high school, all of a sudden stealing clothes and stealing other things. And so I think of this story as like, I mean, I don't think there's any shadow of a doubt that like this doctor and whatever she's talking about, if you look at the wealth of information we have currently, right, there's validity to what she's saying on some level. We'll find out more about all of it. But if anything, I'm like, I don't look at Joshua Primo and think like, man, he must be the worst ever, and let's never let him in the NBA again. If anything, it's like, here's a time where this kid could actually like learn, accept responsibility, apologize, and then there's a future for him. Now, whether the infrastructure will allow him to do that, because the Spurs could have allowed him to do that internally. They could have helped with his growth right along the way and said, okay, we're not going to not talk about this. We're going to actually sit him down, bring her in, talk to him about why this is wrong, and use it as like a learning moment for him, rather than like the kind of sports culture we've seen. So now we're left with like it blowing up in public on him, which to me is like, obviously he's the one who his actions have led us here, but also the internal structure of sports and the way the Spurs handled this they have also let him down. So it's like, and this could be an example of something where we could see him back in the league and like real growth from him.
Tom, let me ask you a question. Is Pop skating in this? He is the face of the organization. He is the guy that stands up. Remember, famously stood up against a lot of the terrible rhetoric coming out of Trump and Trump apologists and all that in a notoriously red state, for an ownership group that is notoriously red itself. Pop has been long regarded as, you know, what Kate was referring to earlier, like this super progressive guy. He is the most important man in the organization. R.C. Buford might be the general manager, but he answers to Greg Popovich. And he's also the head coach of the team. So he has a direct control on players and who plays and who doesn't play. And yet this happened under his watch. And it's virtually impossible to imagine that it could happen without his knowledge.
So what's interesting about that, Amin, is that the lawyer almost opened up his press conference talking about when speaking about this particular case, how Greg Popovich often talks about issues that are bigger than basketball. And he was pointing the finger right back at him and saying, like, look, this is your organization. You might not be the CEO like R.C. Buford. You might not be the GM like Brian Wright, but you are very much the face of this organization. I would bet the highest paid non-basketball player on the staff. And then he was quick to point out that Dr. Hillary Cawthon tried to reach Popovich about this and went to the GM and said, like, a few months after the initial allegation, she had allegedly a meeting with the GM and said, does Pop know about this? Because she said she had great respect for Popovich and wanted him to know, because she could not believe that he knew about this and that he still believes that this is okay. This is acceptable behavior. And it was relayed to her, I mean, that Popovich did know, but the lawyer said, we have every reason to believe that that was a lie, that was not the truth, that Popovich didn't know. And so while I thought that they were going to hammer Popovich on this one, they actually, it seems, are pointing the finger at the people around him, protecting him or insulating him, perhaps as part of a cover-up. Like, if Popovich knows this thing, this blows up. We can't have Popovich know. And that was the picture that they painted, was that Popovich actually had no idea. Now, this gets back to Mark Cuban about the workplace issues, the misogyny, and all of that happened in the Dallas Mavericks. Is like, how can you honestly say you had no idea that this was going on? Joshua Primo was the number 12 pick for the San Antonio Spurs in 2021. They picked up his third-year option, right? It was third-year option, right? I mean,
third-year option, yeah.
Which would be $4 million approximately.
4.3.
that they were going to pay him. They picked up that option in early October, and then this explodes. This just blows up a few weeks later. So they knew something was happening, or the GM knew something was happening. And then they waived him without releasing a substantial statement or explaining what was happening. So did Popovich know? I think that's going to be something he's going to be asked here. I don't suspect that the Spurs will hide Popovich, much in the same way the Nets have hid Kyrie Irving. But that is something he's going to have to, and the Spurs have to answer for, is like, how much did Greg Popovich know about this? And why didn't he know if he did not know? Because that's what the picture that she's painting here.
It just kind of, you two have lived more inside of like the NBA world. You know, it just begs the question at times of the kind of normal human interaction and where you handle something that comes across behaviors of humans, bad things that are happening, good things that are happening, in a very like common sense way. And it feels like our sports world, and in this case, we're looking at the NBA because there's a lot of stories just simmering in the NBA now. Maybe you get too much money, too big, all of that, and like common sense just isn't a thing as much for you anymore, because this did not have to be a huge issue, right? Like we go back to all the time, like the cover up is worse than the crime itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the worlds you've lived in, where is the common sense when it comes to the human resources side of things, the structural side of basketball franchises? Because I think it was like 4 or 5 Meadowlarkers ago. I mean, I think when we were talking about the Boston Celtics, we got into a lot about how, you know, the head coach might be in charge of the coaches and of the players are kind of under him, but like he's not leading the marketing side. He's not leading the sales side, the business side. And like there is the structural hierarchy of an NBA organization that is sort of outside of the public eye. But I mean,
Right.
within these worlds right now, I'm like, is the NBA just too much money and they've kind of lost sight of just common sense behavior patterns at this point?
Well, I think it's the opposite. I don't think they've lost sight. It's the opposite. They've never had sight of it to begin with. Right? These are, you know, you started it, Kate, actually at the beginning of this episode. You said the NBA gets a pass because they have been so progressive in so many ways, including the hiring and diversification of its workforce, both along racial and gender lines. But that comes against the backdrop of not having the infrastructure. So it's like, oh, no, we got a bunch of women in here and even a bunch of women in high positions of power. All right, cool. Our work is done, but we've done nothing to ensure their safety or their respect, really, is what we're talking about within this construct. We've just shoved them into this environment that hasn't evolved at all to be willing to accept them. And so all of that is what we're talking, or what we're seeing in these different instances. We're seeing, you know, a culture that was design makes it seem intentional, a culture that evolved around the dearth of like diversity of gender. And so now it hasn't caught up to the reality of the hiring department. And now what the Spurs have painted themselves into the corner, and the Celtics did also, is this concept of, oh man, that isn't right, and we shouldn't be doing that. Also, though, I don't want to completely cut off my nose to spite my face, right? In essence, that's their thought process, right? Like, he is a pretty good coach, or he is a pretty good prospect. And so we get into these dueling vanities. One of, we're a good organization that cares about people and does things the right way, and also, but this guy's really good and really important. So is there any way we can just make it go away and pretend it didn't happen and hope that solves it? That's the end of that. It was one time and that's it. And it's 2 times, and that's a third time. I swear to God, that's it. And what we see with the Spurs specifically in this situation is it reached a critical mass where they realized not that it wouldn't stop. They realized we can't keep it a secret. We can't fix it. And at that point, you try to get ahead of it. And I mean, think about how many people applauded the Spurs. That's how you do it. You just cut ties with someone who does that awful behavior. And they didn't wait for that other shoe to drop, which is, they did it because they had this entire calendar of not doing the right thing because they thought they could make it go away.
Yeah. I mean, there might not be a business that has wonkier power dynamics than professional sports. Like, you've got, you sort of like fly on the wall inside of a session between Dr. Hillary Coffin and Joshua Primo, and you're like, okay, by all intents and purposes, she's a, an established mental health professional. I don't know. I'm just making up her age. Let's say she's 35 or 40.
That was another weird thing. That the lawyer for Joshua Primo was insistent on pointing out multiple times that she's 40 years old and that she was preying on a young teenager. And it's like, well, so like if she was 21, it would have been okay. Like, like what is that about? Yeah, sorry.
Or maybe he no, that's a good point, Tom, because I think it's setting up this idea of like part of what he's hinting at, maybe, I guess in some reading between the lines, it's like, I don't know, is she considered too old for him? Why would he have exposed himself to a 40-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Well, that makes no sense. I mean, it was part that, and then maybe part trying to switch the power dynamic around in retrospect. Like, well, she was 40 and she was seeing him for past trauma. Therefore, the power dynamic was she had power over him because she was treating him. And you could see that happening with what the lawyer was trying to say, but it gets back to this, to the heart of just, if we're looking right now at the NBA, I'm like, I can't think of wonkier power dynamics because you've got, Primo. I mean, I don't know the Spurs list off the top of my head. I mean, Spurs roster off the top of my head, like y'all do, but like, might he be the 8th most powerful person in that organization?
Right. Well, they picked up his option, and then with knowing all of this history, that there were issues continually, and they what she accuses the Spurs of is essentially pushing her out of the organization and saying at one point, you're going to sit this out. And meanwhile, while she is speaking, I mean, I had my laptop open to her speaking and holding back tears, recounting how she tried to get the Spurs to do something and to make an appropriate workplace environment where this was not okay. And she was getting emotional, recounting the management side, and just like how she tried to do the right thing and tried to bring it to the powers that be, and then was silenced, right? Essentially moving you aside. As I'm watching this and being like, this is a huge bombshell on the NBA, Adam Silver comes out with a statement on Kyrie Irving. Finally, right? A week after Kyrie Irving posted the link to the to the movie, the film Hebrews to Negroes, on the Amazon link, a week had passed until we heard from the commissioner. We had a very dry, just like nameless, generic statement from the league, but we hadn't heard from Adam Silver. And here's his statement this morning, on Thursday morning. Kyrie Irving made a reckless decision to post a link to a film containing deeply offensive anti-Semitic material. While we appreciate the fact that he agreed to work with the Brooklyn Nets and the Anti-Defamation League to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination, I am disappointed that he has not offered an unqualified apology and, more specifically, denounced the vile and harmful content contained in the film he chose to publicize. I will be meeting with Kyrie in person in the next week to discuss this situation. I mean, what was your reaction to seeing that statement from Adam Silver this Thursday morning?
Well, it started with about damn time. Before I even saw what he said in the statement, I'm like, about damn time that Adam comes out and has a statement in it. We know the NBA put out a statement earlier denouncing anti-Semitism, but curiously refrained from adding any context like, oh, I don't know, the name Kyrie Irving from their statement. And we went into great detail on that in Basketball Illuminati this week. So definitely check out that episode if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But when I saw Adam's statement, I read it. And
rabbit hole is a purview of a different podcast, by the way. That's off.
Oh, sorry. Good.
Thank you. Also, get that podcast wherever you get your podcast.
Promo hour. No, so when I went back and I read the statement, the things I thought of were, one, I'm glad he used his name, but two, when I got to the last sentence where he says he plans to meet with Kyrie Irving, I said, you mean you haven't met with him yet?
Yeah.
Olympic Tower is something like 8 miles away from Barclays Center. It's a subway ride away, a 30-minute subway ride away from Barclays Center. The fact that he hasn't met with him in 6 days about a pretty pressing issue that is dominating coverage of the league. I was floored to learn that, because typically the league acts pretty quickly. Typically, when they put out a statement like that, the meeting has already happened, and they won't even talk about the meeting. You'll hear about it. Man, yeah, Adam Silver got on the phone and he spoke with, I plan to talk. You plan to talk to him? So that was staggering to me. And then you said you hope he apologizes, which, as we know from Kyrie's press conference, he did not, or at least he did not utter the words, I apologize, or say, I'm sorry. Rather, he did this really curious thing, which he did earlier, or a week ago or so, when asked about Alex Jones, the Alex Jones post that he had, where he will start by saying all the right things, but then end almost instinctively with still remaining in contact with the thing he's supposed to be denouncing. So in the Alex Jones case, he said, the thing I posted, I know Alex Jones is, a bad, like he calls him like, oh, not the best guy or whatever. And he expresses sympathy for the Sandy Hook victims, and like, okay, great, Kyrie, just all right. But then he ends it with, he posted this in the 90s. And by the way, it's about the occult. And by the way, it's all true.
All true.
It's like, you were almost home free. You could have just said, sorry about that. That guy's bad news. And this must have been so awful for the Sandy Hook people. My bad. No, he's walking away, but he still has one hand touching, but I kind of like it though. Right? Same thing here. I hurt people. I don't mean to hurt people. I believe in everything. But then he says, I didn't make the documentary. Like everything is, and then later on says there are some things in there that are very troubling or problematic about. Like, why are you qualifying statements as if like he doesn't want to anger Alex Jones, as if he doesn't want to anger the maker of this documentary? Like they're still like, no, I still want to be cool with you guys. I gotta take responsibility, but also, are we still cool? Because I kind of like some of this stuff.
Kate, do you have like a question that you would want to ask Kyrie? Like if you were in that scrum, like not to checkmate him or gotcha journalism, but like it does seem like he's weaseling his way around having accountability. And today, Nick Friedel from ESPN, who we used to work with there, he was like, why can't you say yes or no to the question, do you have anti-Semitic beliefs? He would not answer that question yes or no. He kept evading, and just this word salad was happening.
Well, it's like what's most sort of frustrating, sort of overused. I don't know what emotion I'm pulling here, but like Kyrie Irving has told us who he is. And he also has presented himself as someone who's like willing to lose whatever it is, money, playing time, his beliefs are so strong, and he's so strong in his beliefs, he is willing to sacrifice for them. Is sort of what he wants to present himself as. And yet he also wants to have his cake and eat it too in all of these instances as well, where he listeners couldn't see this, but Amin was also physically sort of like remaining in touch with the radioactive idea over here that Kyrie wants to stay within arm's length on. So it's like Kyrie knows he touched something that is going to cost him more than he can comprehend, right? I mean, he just saw Kanye lose deals that Kanye himself at least said out loud he didn't think he could ever lose, like his Adidas deal. And so maybe we're in this place now with Kyrie where it's like, all right, I want to remain in contact with this idea that I am a bold truth teller. And yet I can't go so far to be completely excommunicated out of the league and have my every single apparel deal I have canceled. And that's the place I think we find Kyrie in right now, is having his cake and eating it too.
I wouldn't be surprised if he's waived by the Brooklyn Nets by Thanksgiving. I thought when he signed his 4-year deal with the Nets in 2019, I was like, I could totally see him just retiring before that is done. Just the idea of Kyrie Irving and the NBA and Nike and all the things he's supposedly about, it doesn't really seem to align, because on one hand, he says, I'm just a human being. Don't put me on this pedestal like I have influence. And then says in the next sentence that he has an amazing amount of influence and a community and an army around me. Which one is it, Kyrie? But there is this angle here of Nike, of like Nike is sitting here as one of the biggest sponsors of the NBA. The NBA does not have a statement for 6 days.
Hold on. One of the biggest sponsors of the NBA and one of the biggest employers of Kyrie Irving. His signature shoe is through Nike. He has, he has a pretty hefty endorsement deal with them. So it's not just their involvement with the league as a whole, it's with him specifically.
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I was just saying, like, where's Nike on this? And is the toothless statements from the NBA, because we always say follow the money. If you want to know why the NBA hasn't come down hard on Kyrie Irving, it's 6 days since Adam Silver spoke up. What's this about? Like, I mean, do you have a good answer for that question? Is why hasn't the NBA or the Brooklyn Nets come down strongly on Kyrie Irving and we know the Players Association, why they didn't put Kyrie's name in their statement. He's the VP and it's one of their clients. Why the NBA?
Dan asked me the same question on the show, and I could not fathom an answer. David Sampson posited that are they afraid of something, or some sort of backlash or Kyrie's reaction? He's a very volatile young man. And so could matters be exacerbated even worse if you do this without helping him understand and get to that point? Again, I know people are saying, well, why does it matter if he understands or not? You should just do it. But it's like Adam Silver's mission is not just to punish Kyrie Irving. Adam Silver's mission is to damage control the situation, to minimize the amount of negative PR that the league is going to, get hit with as a result of this. And if the path to doing that is a more subtle, I won't call it lenient, but like just a less reactive response to Kyrie, then he's going to do that. That's the only thing I can think of, is like, if I come down hard the way you guys want me to come down hard, this guy's really going to go off and say a bunch of stuff that's even more damaging and more hurtful and more divisive.
Yeah, because the big, I guess the question I have at this point is, I mean, in the most obvious way possible, like something has gone wrong inside of Kyrie Irving over the last couple of years. Like he is different in his mind. At least the way he is behaving publicly, right? It seems like he's improved himself, right? He is now conscious and open to the reality of the world and the conspiracies of it and the way it's always worked that he's never known. And yet from like the NBA fan, the casual NBA fan, it's like, what has happened? Why are we in this position now? And I think there is a lot of overlap in the way I think about Kyrie and try to talk about Kyrie and the way I would have talked about Kanye West a couple years ago, which is, is this a place where we're like, Adam Silver needs to sit down with Kyrie Irving and like truly understand what's going on with him right now, right? Like from a purely like, does he need help? Like, what is there a mental health issue that like we've talked about? It's just to Amin's point of like, if you just immediately react and send Kyrie in the complete opposite, like so that there's a volatile counteraction, like that doesn't help the NBA because you're still in this position where one of your top 5 biggest stars, or at least top 5 biggest stars at one time or another, is like in active conflict with the league. And it seems to be an active conflict with like maintaining like a tether to reality as well. And so if your long-term goal is to get Kyrie Irving back to a place where he is like an ambassador for the game of basketball in the NBA, well, then what are the steps you take between now and that outcome? And the next one seems to be patience to a point, and then actually sitting down with him so you can look him in the eyes and try to actually gather human information about why he's doing the things he's doing, because none of us can I mean, you've sat across from him, I'm sure, in many a press scrum, but it's hard right now to get to a place where you can say like, this adds up. Like, Occam's razor, like, what is the common sense solution to this? Like there is none for this. Like there is no, we went from A to B and I can see all the steps along the way. So I if I'm Adam Silver, I'm like, man, there's a lot of missing information right here.
To be fair, I think this is more of a tug of war for Kyrie about his desire to not have to rethink himself or his stance on stuff.
Stubborn.
Yeah, it's stubbornness. I think he truly thinks he's not anti-Semitic. Hell, I don't even know if he's anti-Semitic. But what I do know is he's a guy that once I say something, I'm going to double, rather than, no matter how ridiculous it is, I would rather double and triple down than just say, oops, you know what? That's a good point. You got me there.
Yeah, he's so entrenched now. It's just
it's not
do you
about
think this is like a truly sort of like athlete stubbornness. Like we don't see a lot of, like, going back to the power dynamic, we don't see a lot of like high level athletes actually saying, I was wrong. You're right. That was a flaw. Like that is not a thing we see athletes doing regularly, except for like, my bad, or like, I got to be better for the team. But like truly on something like this, you don't see a lot of them being like,
ideas.
I'm wrong.
Right, yeah, on ideas, not on plays, not on the on-court dynamics, but on ideas, and particularly ones who want to be known as thoughtful. That's an important part of this. It's like he wants to be identified as, ooh, didn't think about it that way, did you? Wow, you really opened my mind. There are a ton of athletes who have some ridiculous beliefs and ideologies, but we don't know about it because they don't share that, because they're like, I just showed up here to get some, score some points, win a championship, and I'm done. Whether I hate all people who have, green eyes or whatever, like that's their own personal thing, right? It's kind of like, reminds me of like Kurt Schilling, who said all sorts of manner of racist stuff. Do you think Kurt Schilling is the only baseball player who espouses those ideas? Given when you see the background of a lot of these players, grew up in small towns in rural America, whatever. No, it's just most of them are not outspoken like Kurt Schilling decided to be. It's the same thing with Kyrie. It's not so much the idea, it's that he demands that he is thought of in a certain way. And because of that, it makes it harder for him to backtrack or distance himself or concede points, because it might appear as if, wait a second, I thought you were a guy who's a deep thinker. Now, a couple of reporters ask you some tough questions and you're changing your mind.
The conundrum that I find myself in with Kyrie is like, unlike, I know, you just kind of brought up Kurt Schilling. One thing Kurt Schilling has always been like consistent in the beliefs that he espouses. and they sort of add up to what you would assume. They every step along the way, you're like, yep, that's what I thought Kurt Schilling would think about that. Whereas Kyrie is like, you know, he's been such a champion for, like, look at Sue Bird, right? Before the WNBA sort of like has gained traction and popularity over the last couple of years, he was making those Keep Sue Fresh sneakers for her that released every year with different color patterns, and like donated money to the WNBA Players Association at that's what leads me back to this idea of like, something's going on. It doesn't add up, because it's like
that's the part where, when people, I won't call them surrogates, but people who know Kyrie say, this guy's not a hateful guy. And a lot of people are like, wait a sec, but he's saying this stuff and he's tweeting this stuff. How can you say that? Like, I understand what they mean, because he's not a hateful guy, but he is a guy. That's why I mean, when I say he's a guy that cares more about the principle of, you can't force me to change my mind. Not so much that you can't force me to change my mind on anti-Semitism. You can't force me to change my mind, whether it's about a tweet I tweeted out, a link I tweeted out, or about a vaccine, or about whatever. You're not going to sit here and tell me what to think, regardless of if you're actually right or not. This guy is not fighting a war on the topic. He's fighting a war on, almost like a little kid. You can't tell me what to do. Nah, 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 nah.
Right.
And
so his allegiance is not to reality and the truth. It's to his own ego.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I think when we talk about Joshua Primo and Greg Popovich and Kyrie Irving and the Nets and the NBA and Nike and the Spurs legacy, I am very thankful that we, as journalists or the media, still have this podcast and still have our platform, because I'm not so sure that Kyrie Irving and Greg Popovich and the Spurs and the rest of these institutions would have to answer for these questions if we didn't exist. And Kyrie Irving wouldn't have a platform to tweet out, I guess. If Twitter didn't exist, maybe we wouldn't be here. But yeah,
we're changing the world, Tom, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I would like to say that I will solve all the issues this Saturday when the Nets are in town here in Charlotte, and I'm going to go ask that one question to Kyrie that resolves everything, and everyone says kumbaya, but I don't think that highly of myself. I don't know what could possibly make this go away. So, hey, Kate, Amin, thank you for having me on today and taking the wheel here, and hopefully there will be some Don Drysdale upside to this, that we will get some more Drysdale material. Maybe some really cool stuff sent to us from the Drysdales. That would be nice.
Hopefully that'll be the positive thing that comes out of this.
I gotta go talk to Annie now. Like they want gifts.
Give her heads up. Bye, y'all.